Hi everyone. We're very happy to welcome you all to this Ocean Freight Rates at a Glance webinar. I'm Martin Thomason and I'm the Customer Success Manager here at Xeneta. I'll be moderating today's webinar, but I'm also joined by Michael Brown, which is the Director of Value Engineering and also Head of the Advisory Service here at Xeneta. The overall goal of today's session is to bring you as a listener some insight on some of the bigger trades, ocean trades worldwide, and hopefully also shed some light on how you as a procurement professional potentially can utilize our information in your line of work. Before we start the presentation, just a few housekeeping items. The webinar is scheduled for 30 minutes, where the presentation is for 25 minutes and the Q&A is for 5 to 10 minutes. Everyone will be on mute, but you can ask your questions in the right-hand side of your screen in the question box. And just for your information, this session is also being recorded and will be sent out after the presentation is done. So, Michal, housekeeping items out of the way. Feel free to take over the presenter role here and then share the agenda for today.
Thanks, Martin. So welcome everybody also from my side. As Martin has already outlined, we will give you, as most of you will be completely new to our company, we will give you a quick overview on what Xeneta actually is and our key statements, so our main goal and mission statement. And then, of course, the purpose of today, we will go into, yes, a couple of live Xeneta rates from our platform, so to show you how we actually present our market information, the kind of use cases you can profit from, and then also refer to our latest introduction on this kind of index-based solutions. So overall, it should be a very interesting 25 minutes, and we hope that you take out a lot of things. And then please feel free to answer your questions right at the end of the session. So starting with it, what is actually our goal? Well, it's pretty much been described in one sentence. We would like to be the platform, the source, which is providing the most accurate ocean freight benchmarks and market intelligence information. So to support everybody in the world who is linked to ocean freight procurement, and to help to bring transparency into a quite intransparent industry with a lot of volatility. This is our main goal, and all our solutions are guiding to this one sentence. What are we today? Well, we have been founded in 2012 by two former Kühne + Nagel managers. Our headquarters are situated in Oslo, and we have now grown up to an established company with over 60 employees, with several offices around the world. And the base of our information and where our customers profit from is definitely our rate database of around 65 million contracted rates and contracts on the ocean freight market, pure port, which we have now delivered throughout the time from all of our customers, which are mainly either shippers, BCOs or smaller shippers, as well as freight forwarders, where we can nowadays are proud to say that, yes, a vast majority of the top 10 freight forwarders in the world is now working with us, for example. This has now led to this extensive database. And just that you give an idea about the state of the art is that at the beginning of this year, we just have been around 35 million. So another 30 million of current rates for 2018 have now been entered in the system just within 6 months. So we really have now a constant influx of several million of contracted rates pouring into our database from our vast customer base all around the world, which now leads to around 160,000 port pairs, which enables us to really, yes, bring profits to most of our customers and also enable them to have an overlap with their own networks, in most cases around 90 to 100%. What is important to state here, especially compared to a lot of other market providers of market data, is that our data is updated in real time. So we are not only publishing weekly data or monthly or yearly results or projects, but that it's really a 24/7 real-time platform. So constantly rate data is imported by our rate management team, and then on the other hand, published without on the platform. So to say that we will also have today a look directly into rate information, which is just from today, and displays the last 6-7 months of this year already. And then last but not least, it's also important as we serve all parties within the ocean freight industry, we are an independent and neutral source. So we don't belong to any carrier, we don't belong to any freight forwarder. Our shareholders are all just from the tech side, from investment side, but not at all from the transport industry or related in any way to the logistics industry, because we really want to bring transparency into the industry, independent from any kind of stakeholders, so that everybody can profit from it. And you will later on see with our solutions that we directly aim and better link all of the parties within the ocean freight industry. To further go on that, we have now established a level where we are actually also a trusted source for quite a lot of the specific logistics news. So you can find our publications in a couple of press releases, as well as the kind of trends what you see here on that specific slide. So just to summing up, what are we actually doing and what are the purposes our customers use us? Well, we collect contracted rate information from our customers, being it now freight forwarders or shippers. So usually the final result of global tenders from them in Excel, we collect them with our rate management team in Oslo, which is nowadays around 15 people, not doing anything else than really handling these kind of massive data around, making sure that it's displayed correctly on the platform and then handled electronically. And in that way, making sure that all of the rate information what we publish is really up to date and is also fitting without any data mistakes. Our customers are then using it for several use cases. Of course, the most important one, the one which we also have a look at today, is monitoring the market development, looking at the volatility in the market and just to watch the latest developments if the markets are going up or down. So to get a very good overview on what is actually currently happening. This, of course, then also enables them to benchmark their own performance. As you have such a wide independence picture from a third party, you can, of course, then also measure yourself very well in identifying gaps and best practices, which we then also share with our customers in so-called customer summits once a year, and in addition to quarterly webinars, a little bit more expensive than the one what you're listening in today. Our customers then use that information also for their own procurement. Of course, target setting in the next round, preparing their RFQs and so on, also answering rate information for themselves. And of course, then also using us as an established third-party reference for their own reporting towards higher management on all aspects and all levels. But that's not the only case. As I've already said, we are also working with freight forwarders together. And they even use us on a more extensive level because they use us for the daily procurement, as they are not only running global or quarterly tenders, but they actually need to be up to date every day. So they take us as a third party measurement as well. And they also use us then in the same way to either identify future sales opportunities, showing like, okay, where is good or bad performance, or where you are not active at all, then you can take us as a cross reference, as well as quickly answering numerous RFQ events, at least for the first round, so that they don't need to, suppress their own pricing engine, but that they actually can just use our reference rate for answering the first requests, as well as then, of course, specific requests from their own customers. So especially in 3PL or 4PL businesses, or also like index-based contracts, they use our market information as a reference to prove that their procurement performance is very well in line with the market and that they are doing a good job. So that's overall a little bit an idea on what we are doing with our customers. So we're always happy to share these kind of use cases, especially because they show you that there are a couple of potential profits you can take out. Some are looking more for performance evaluations, others want to be up to date with the market development. So there are several probabilities how to use us in the best way. And that's why we always want to mention that, yes, a lot of you customers use us in very different ways. But now, as this whole webinar is of course going concretely into our market, I would like to switch over to what we then concretely deliver with our customers. For this example, we have not just decided to show, well, rate levels on the four most important markets in the world, just to give you a little bit of an indication on how you could use our platform and the market intelligence out of it. Namely, it will be 2 trades out of the Far East to Northern Europe and the Trans-Pacific, as well as then 2 trades out of Europe towards North America over the transatlantic, as well as then to the Far East. That's to give you a little bit of an impression how you could use our platform for either your daily procurement or as well for your strategic decision making throughout the year. So for that thing, I will now directly switch into our platform. Just wait now for a sec. So this is now a typical example of one of the different regions what we are able to show you. What is important to be mentioned is that no matter at what point of time you start becoming a customer, you will always get access to the full data along in the full history, so that you really get a good overview on what to see on the market development. When we talk about market development, there's one important aspect which also differentiates us from a lot of other market information providers, is that due to the extensive amount of data being delivered either by shippers as well as freight forwarders, we are able to actually display 2 different markets at the same time, meaning the long-term market on the one side, which is displayed by the blue line. So namely yearly tenders, quarterly tenders being brought in by our shipper space, who usually conducted through tenders, as well as then the spot market, which is for 100% only delivered by the freight forwarders and consists of the typical short-term rates, which are handled on an everyday basis. And of course, by displaying both of the markets at the same time, it gives you also a very, very good correlation on how the short-term and the long-term market are behaving together, and in what way the long-term market is actually, yes, depending on the prior short-term development. You are then able to display the kind of time range you would like to show. So for today's session, I have now just chosen the last 18 months to give you a little bit of an overview. Of course, we differentiate for the equipment. So 20 foot and 40 foot are not calculated together. We are not talking about average TUs, but specific rate levels for the various equipment types, as well as then also going into special equipment with reefer and tank containers as well. The next thing, which is also worth to be mentioned, is that the rate levels what you are seeing here can be displayed according to your corresponding processes. So depending on if you have a free on board Incoterms, or if you are having intra sites related transports, you are always able to display it in the way you need it for yourself. So either with THEs included or excluded on any side you need it, so that the corresponding port-to-port benchmark rates are definitely displayed in all of the processes you needed. And then that's our latest feature. You can really drill down, not only seeing all our rate levels what we have in the database, but really going into only the last 3 months, meaning that on a single day, the average, which is then calculated here, like the 1472, is then only made up from contracts which are only valid on within the last quarter for this specific day. So you can be sure that the development actually displays rate levels which really have been only recently tendered, and we are not taking into account contracts which have been, for example, contracted 2 years ago with a completely different market situation. So the data you see there is really brand new and just come from the latest tenders being just concluded. So that's pretty much a little bit the philosophy of our platform. Of course, there is much more to see, different screens, detailed Excel screens, detailed lists where you can do your own calculations, also calculate your own budgets. But for the time being and for today, that's the only screen I would like to explain you. And if you would like to see more information for other screens or proper demonstrations, even with your own data and your own contract information displayed as well, please feel free to contact us, especially our salespeople, and they are then happy to set up individual web demonstrations for you and your company. Last but not least, perhaps just to blend it in, we are also not only displaying average market levels, but also the market low and the market high. So you always get both for the short-term and the long-term market the whole bandwidth of the market, how we perceive it today, so that you can really evaluate for yourself how good your performance is and if you're satisfied with the kind of strategic goals you have previously set. Now, going into it and yes, displaying a little bit of the use cases, I would like now to start with the trade out of Asia, which is by far the biggest one on the world when it comes to, yes, also our customer base. This is now really a high level view because we only want to show you kind of general trends and general information. But if you are a customer of, and we have already mentioned our 160,000 power pairs, you are really able to actually display it on a specific geographical level, not even going down only on a country level, but really going down on a specific port pair. So if you are looking for the port pair from Shanghai to Abidjan or from Shanghai to Hamburg or whatever, you are always entitled to do so. But of course, for today and not to drill down in 150 screens, we stay on a high overall generic level. But in principle, you can access down to all of the port pairs what we have in our database, then fitting to your network, so that you really get the port-to-port related information applicable, as long as we have enough overlap to display it. But at the moment, we are able here to do so for 160,000 port pairs. Now, I would like to just say for what reasons are our customers using it? Well, it's quite easy, especially on that screen. As you can see, the trade out of Asia is mainly triggered, especially on the short-term market, by general rate increases. So from time to time, the carrier base try to increase the rate level and set it on a new level by implementing general rate increases. And then it will always be the questions, do they actually hold or do they vanish again? Do we have a downturn trend or do we have an upturn trend? And usually what we see is that this kind of corresponding trend on the short-term market is then also followed by the long-term market with a little bit of a delay, just due to the fact that, of course, the contracting of the long-term market with the tenders always takes a little bit of time with the negotiations rounds. But in general, we can really say that at the moment when the short-term market is going up, the long-term market is following, as well as then the other way around. Like, for example, the situation what we had towards the end of last year. As you can see then here, the short-term market was really on a kind of a downward trend up to the end. The long-term market then followed in due course. Since then, the market had been quite stable until the beginning of this year, and then we saw again a significant rate increase up to in the line with Chinese New Year. And as you can see for this year, this upward trend around Chinese New Year was only been working on the short-term market. There was not really that much going on. The fight for capacities was still ongoing, so we couldn't see any kind of influence on the long-term market. All of the global tenders more or less ran within the same situation. And even then, in the long run, expected a decrease of rate levels because after Chinese New Year, a lot of overcapacities had been there. And then we have seen quite a significant downward trend, which also pretty much distinguished our last quarter's webinar 3 months ago. So at that point of time, end of April, there was literally no sign at all for a change of the market situation. It was even the kind of risk that we see a further beating for market shares. But then, yes, the situation changed a little bit due to the rising oil price, the situation we have seen already at the beginning of the year. And then, of course, the rate levels had to go back on a higher level again because the carriers had to cope with the higher costs. And that was actually the situation what we have seen so far throughout the last quarter, that most of this kind of an increase has now come again due to the fact of the bunker price increases. And now you can also see that with the latest contracts in July, we already saw an increase on the long-term market again. And now it will be interesting to see if this is actually a new trend starting up or if it's now just starts on that level. As the kind of increase on the oil price now has also come to an end. We are now back at a steady increase of 10 to 20%. So this is also in line now with the rate levels. So depending on how the oil price further goes, of course, depending on any other political situation, that's the situation for the moment. And we actually expect it to stay like that, at least towards the rest of this year, if not anything unpredicted happens. Then, of course, there will be probably more volatility coming in, especially when now the first tender rounds for next year start, as we then have to cope already with the new introduction of the low sulfur later in 2020, but that will already be then touched by the 2019 tender round, which is coming up. So that's why we will most probably see changes in the rate level again latest towards the end of the year. Of course, looking at the political situation at the moment, this can of course also happen already before. And this is also kind of a situation what we see at the moment on the Trans-Pacific. There, it had been quite a stable situation around the TPM. We then saw a significant downturn towards the end of after the TPM, but this trend has now also stopped with a lot of recent general rate increases coming into place, and we also expect that this will have an influence on the rate level on the long run. But this is of course also then something which needs to be closely focused, especially with the situation when it comes to the tariffs at the moment and the potential tariff war coming upward. This will of course also have a significant impact on the ocean freight rates, as we are heavily dependent on globalization in general, and of course the trade growth in specific. So at the moment, we clearly see an upward trend on the Trans-Pacific, at least on the short-term market. There had been now 3 successful general rate increases. So we would expect it to actually now also arrive on the long-term market. But as we've already said, with the uncertain political situation, it's very hard to say how this market is going to behave in the near future. There are a lot of things going on also with the capacity allocations, so it's definitely advisable, yes, to follow this trade closely. And this is also a kind of the thing what our customers then do on a regular basis, even if they are not in the middle of their tender. But as you can see, a lot of things are happening. Also then, yes, sometimes showing short-term being below long-term market as well as the other way around. This, of course, always have an influence, especially on the freight forwarders and their cost and pricing structure. So in that way, yes, a lot of our customers just follow us on a regular level to be aware of these kind of market changes on a constant level. Same applies, of course, also on the transatlantic. Here, due to the hike on the oil price, we also saw a significant increase starting in April this year, with a latest significant increase already coming in place now as well. So here it will be also very interesting if this is just the start of a no increasing process, or if you just have seen a correction due to the oil price cost in that regard. And that's why, same thing, transatlantic, also a lot of things are happening at the moment. It had been quite stable throughout the last year, hardly any changes, but now this year it definitely looks like that something is going on. So that's definitely one of the markets where our customers are looking more closer, which is of course interestingly exactly the other case around from Europe to Asia. So this was the market where in last year, everybody in the business will definitely remember that, where we had a huge spike and where our customers were extremely happy to get information like this to prove to their own internal people that yes, this market is going crazy, and that's why we have to also accept an increase on the long-term market. That is definitely information which was very, very important for them last year. So there was a lot of going on, and they were very happy with our market information. Of course, when we now talk about this year, the market has been extremely stable throughout the last, 9 to 10 months. And in this regard, at the moment, everybody would say, yeah, well, that's a very easy and good market, but then on the long run, you never know what's going to happen. And that's why our customers, of course, yes, stay close on the tips in order to be sure that they don't miss any kind of recent development. And that's also the last point I would like to refer to today, after going into these kind of 4 detailed markets at a glance, is to also mention a little bit our last index-based solution, because one of the points what we often get asked by our customers, also like the freight forwarders, is like, especially in a market situation what we are having at the moment, if it's such a constant rate level, why not going on a long-term contract? Why not fixing that rate for 2 to 3 years, which is of course on the one side in the interest of the shipper, because then he has a price continuity. On the other side, yes, the freight forwarder could in theory also fix the customer relationship for a long-term frame. But of course, when you are never be sure that there aren't any kind of rate hikes coming in again, which would of course completely destroy the profit calculation of a freight forwarder, you need to have some kind of measures to actually handle these kind of freight deviations. And with this regard, I would like to just mention our latest solution, which has been now come into place, and this is our index-based contracting. So currently we are already having the first customers where we now actually use this kind of our indexes to actually use it also for direct contracting between our customers, because we have a couple of shippers, we have a couple of freight forwarders, well, a couple, yes, we have hundreds, but we have a couple of them both working with us together, and they have now decided to cope with the volatility, which is just natural in the market, that they are not running constant tenders all the time, but that they actually use our index rates as the kind of proven reference to go for a base for their own individual contracts, so that they actually can go in long-term customer relationships and long-term contracts, but at the same time at the guaranteed fair market price, which is actually delivered by us as an independent source of information. So these kind of index-based prices then gives our shippers the possibility to be sure that they always get competitive rate levels, while at the same time they can of course save the massive amount of workforce they usually use for their tenders, disturbing them from the other important, yes, supply chain related task what they usually have to follow on, as well as with the freight forwarders, that they can ensure long-term contracts with their customers, but at the same time minimize the risks that, yes, they need to go on long-term contracts when they are not sure if they can actually refinance them together with the carrier base. Because if the market is going up and they are stuck in a long-term contract, then it would be, of course, not anymore profitable for them. So that's why usually when you ask for long-term rates, you always get a kind of premium due to the fact of risk insurance they need to cover. And with an index-based pricing adjustment factor, yes, this thing is actually not anymore necessary. And in that way, they really also save the additional effort of tendering. And yes, we are very happy to have this specific product on board now as well, and not only displaying the market intelligence. That to be mentioned at the last, a lot of information in a very short time, but it only should give you a little bit of an indication on what we are able to deliver. And of course, as already said, our salespeople are really happy to answer you all questions in details and also set up individual demonstrations. And with that, I would actually refer back to Martin for our questions and answer session.
Thank you, Michel. As we were a few minutes late, let's spend the remaining 5 minutes here on the questions. We only have a handful of questions, but let me start with the first one here, Michel. How does Xeneta differ from other freight indices, like, for example, the SCFI?
Two very easy answers. The first one is it's daily and not weekly, which is important for freight forwarders. And the second one, which is the main driver for shippers, is that we also are able to display a specific index only for long-term contracts, meaning typical tender rates, while the SCFI is a pure spot market index. And to answer your question, well, you have seen before the Far East to Europe trade. You can say that the average short-term line is more or less the SCFI. So the blue line is coming on top, as well as that we are not only able to display the average, which is the SCFI, but also the market low and the market high, so the whole span of the spot market. So there are different angles and dimensions where we are far more into detail.
Perfect. Another question here. Can you predict rates? If yes, based on what?
No, we can't predict rates. The only thing what we do is giving a future, like an indication or averages on what our contracted rates for the future are going to look like. Meaning that as we get constant influx of rate levels, we of course now also already get contracts which have a contract start of, for example, of 1st of August. So for the customers willing to have this add-on, we are already able to give them the indication on how the averages will most probably look like on the long-term market for August, because we already have rate input for August in. But everything else is crystal ball, because everything else is depending on the situation on the short-term market, and this is actually happening just right away at the moment. So there is no way to foresee what the market is going to be like in 2 to 3 months.
Perfect. 2 more questions here. How do you collect the data from freight forwarders and shippers?
Both in the same way, that usually on an Excel base, only in a massive, vast amount of data, we use directly API connections. But usually it's on Excel base, even with most of the freight forwarders. So just okay, the final contracts with their customers, or yes, from their rate sheets.
Is there a way to compare big volume shippers versus small ones?
We don't have a specific driver here because we can clearly see that there is not really a correlation in. As we know the shippers behind in our database, of course, we are not able to display that information, but we have already made these kind of analyses, and you cannot say that there are big shippers rates and small shipper rates. You can say that there are good procurement rates and yes, a little bit more with room for improvement, but it's not related to the volume as such.
Okay. Bit about the coverage here. One more minute. There's a person there asking about the coverage, and yeah, I would like to know if Xeneta has a database to South America ports. Maybe you can just say something about that.
Definitely. As I said, 160,000 port pairs. I can't tell you how many thousand port pairs are going to South America, but I can tell you that there are many more ports in that I've ever heard of. So yes, we have definitely also a very extensive network to South America, even out of South America as well, at least out of the production centers. And for that reason, for specific coverage analysis, there's always the way that potential customers provide us with their network, and then we are happy to provide them with a ballpark figure on the coverage before they even sign any kind of a contract. Of course, we can sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements if necessary, but we are happy to share the potential profit with them before they even become a customer, so that they can easily calculate a business case for themselves. There's nothing to be hidden in that way. We are happy to promote our capabilities of coverage.
There's actually one question there that I think is rather important to bring up before we end the presentation. But the person asked, the benefits of this system are out of the question. I'm wondering, however, about the accuracy of the rates. Rates comes from forwarding, carrier, and shipper side. What is the incentive for a client to input the rates accurate and share this information?
Well, in general, let's two things. The first one is mistakes can always happen, especially with people handling with large amounts of data and talking about Excel. Everybody knows the risk of that. So that's why we have a huge team of experts, which is actually doing nothing else than checking this kind of rate information before, with a lot of arithmetics behind, with a lot of different algorithms running over it, so that we actually can identify outlying rates and also see if something is going wrong. And that's also the reason why when we display averages or even the low, we are not going on single rates, but we always go in corridors. For example, the low always is represented by the last 2.5%. So it's also a percentile, making sure that not a single outlier is deviating everything. And we are doing extensive tests on that. So I would really say that we are absolute experts on that. And I can tell you that it's definitely highly professional, because even the freight forward as well, and they really handle millions of freights as well, they tell us that we are, some of them even tell us that we are best practice, or that we are at least matching up to their own standards. So we can be sure, you can be sure that the data we handle is on the same level of professionalism like the carriers and the freight forwarders do it themselves. And then I have to answer that, well, if the quality of the rate levels is the same, then the quality of the rates they offer to you and their contracts, that's the best as it could be, because we only display the reality of these contracts out there. So yeah, in that way, we are really very, very confident and super professional about it, and invest a lot of money for it, talking about a whole team sitting in Norway.
Yeah. Good. Thanks for sharing your knowledge here. I think we need to end the questions and answer round. Questions are popping in, so we'll do our best to get back to the people that answered or asked the questions, and we will come back with the answers. As a final slide for today's session, before wishing all of you a pleasant summer, we just want to announce that we soon will launch the Xeneta air freight benchmarking tool that will look almost identical as the ocean freight product. So if you want to know more about this product, feel free to send an email to info@xeneta.com, and we will put you in contact with the right contact person. With that said, Michael, thanks again for sharing your knowledge here and also answering all questions. And yeah, wish all of you a pleasant summer ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you.